Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on the Regenerative Medicine Advanced Therapy, or RMAT designation, focusing on its impact on the regenerative medicine sector and how it compares with other accelerated approval programs. My name is Amanda Miklas. I'm a principal analyst with Informa Pharma Intelligence, which is co-sponsoring this webinar in partnership with the Alliance for Regenerative Medicine. We're at a really pivotal time in the regenerative medicine field. In the last year, we've seen the first two CAR-T therapies, Kymriah from Novartis and Yescarta from Kite Pharma and Gilead, get approved in the U.S., and the first in vivo gene therapy for an inherited disease in the way of Spark Therapeutics' Luxturna also get approved. Scientific advancements, buoyed by increased deal-making and venture investment, have been greatly propelling the field forward, and it's truly an exciting time. Today I'm joined by several experts in the regenerative medicine field, and we're looking forward to an insightful discussion in this webinar on RMAT, the special status pathway for regenerative medicines in the U.S. that is fostering much of the development in this market today. We're lucky to have representation from key stakeholders who have helped shape the RMAT pathway, as well as 3 companies from the industry that together have received 4 of the 20 RMAT designations to date. As for our agenda, we'll first begin with a primer on the RMAT designation, and then we'll follow with some brief introductions of our panelists. After that, we'll get some more background into how the RMAT designation was initially shaped and the role that the Alliance for Regenerative Medicine played in that activity. After that, we'll take a closer look at the accelerated approval programs that are available to sponsors in the U.S. and how RMAT compares and contrasts with those. And then we'll hear from the panelists themselves and their experiences with their individual RMAT designated therapies, and we'll close up with a Q&A section. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started. If you would like to submit questions at any time during the webinar, I direct you to the text box you should see at the bottom of your screen. This webinar is being recorded, and that recording will be sent out to all registrants following the webinar. So let's get started. Firstly, it's useful to understand the RMAT designation itself, how it is defined, and to have some background. So I'd like to introduce Patty Riley, who is the Vice President of Alliances and Product Unification at Informa Pharma Intelligence, who is going to give us a primer on RMAT. So Patty, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Amanda. Next slide. So Congress passed the 21st Century Cures Act in December of 2016, and this act included several provisions related to cell and gene therapies, and the most important being the Regenerative Medicine Advanced Therapy designation, or RMAT. Companies with cell and gene therapies can receive the RMAT designation if their product is intended to treat a serious or life-threatening disease, and there's preliminary clinical evidence that it will meet or address an unmet medical need. This designation makes products eligible for expedited review, similar to those drugs that receive the breakthrough therapy designation, including increased meeting opportunities with the FDA, early interactions to discuss potential surrogate or intermediate endpoints, and the potential for accelerated approval. To qualify the drug as a drug RMAT, the product has to be defined as either a cell therapy, a therapeutic tissue engineering product, or a combination of human and tissue products. The drug is intended to treat or cure a life-threatening condition, as I mentioned, and that there's preliminary evidence that it will meet an unmet need. And we went over the benefits that there will be early and increased interactions with the FDA. Next slide. Comparing the FDA's RMAT with the ATMP from the EU, the Advanced Therapy Medicinal Products Designation, we can see that they're very similar. Gene therapy has been included in the FDA's draft guidance that was published in November of 2017. So now these are very similar pathways. Next slide. These are the products and companies that received the RMAT designation for 2017, and we have some of the stakeholders here with us today. Next slide. And these are the ones that we know of thus far this year. And as you can see, Abeona is the only company thus far that has 2 RMAT designated products, and they're both gene therapies. Last week at Bio International, we heard that there have actually been now 20 products awarded with the designation. 16 have been publicly disclosed. 64 requests have been received, and 34 requests have been denied. Companies that we've heard from are very pleased with their interactions with the FDA. They've cited a very cooperative environment and a willingness to work with companies along the development pathway. The FDA has encouraged companies to work with them right from the start of development rather than waiting till a later stage. And in conversations with CBER, some reasons for denial of the designation were discussed. These included no preliminary clinical evidence, problems with the study design, lack of controls, confusing outcome measures, and inconsistent results. And with that very short primer, I will hand it over to some people to do some discussions about their experiences.
Thanks, Patty. That was really helpful to have those definitions outlined and to see how the FDA's definition of RMAT compares with the EMA's classification of ATMPs, and to also see the sheer volume of RMAT designations that have been granted to date. So thank you for that. We'll have each of the panelists now give a brief introduction of themselves, let us know their roles and which companies they're from. So starting with myself, again, my name is Amanda Miklas. I'm the moderator today, and I'm a principal analyst with Informa Pharma Intelligence in the Data Monitor healthcare product. And I primarily focus on analyzing corporate strategy trends in the pharmaceutical industry and have been following regenerative medicine for several years now. So I'm very excited to be moderating this discussion today. Next, Michael.
Sure, thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Michael Werner. I am the co-founder of the Alliance for Regenerative Medicine and the Senior Policy Counsel. I've actually been working as an attorney in the regenerative medicine space for almost 20 years now, particularly on the regulatory issues such as we're going to talk about today, as well as market access and reimbursement and bioethics issues. My day job is that I'm a partner at the international law firm of Holland & Knight, based in our Washington office, and I co-chair our Health and Life Sciences group. And I'm very excited to be here to talk with everyone today, and certainly excited about the RMAT designation and the impact it's already had on the cell and gene therapy field.
Thanks very much, Michael. Next, Tim.
Good afternoon or good morning, everyone. My name is Tim Miller. I am the co-founder, president, and chief scientific officer of Abeona Therapeutics. My background is in, I have a PhD in molecular biology and have been really serving in biotech companies for about the past 20 years in a variety of roles, from clinical operations, regulatory, and certainly from a manufacturing perspective as well. So, we're very excited to be able to share some of our perspectives on the RMAT and how, we looked at trying to approach the agency and how really some of the differences in the strategies about how you go forward, and looking at really the implementation now of these advanced therapeutic pathways.
Great, thanks, Tim. Next, Kevin.
Good morning. I'm Kevin Healy. I'm the head of regulatory affairs at Roivant Sciences and the global regulatory lead for Enzyme Advanced Therapeutics, including the RVT-802 tissue therapy product, which achieved the breakthrough designation and RMAT designations in April of 2017. And likewise, look forward to discussion today, including our experiences with this product and those designations.
Thanks very much, Kevin. And last but not least, Gil.
Hi, everybody. I'm Gil Van Bachelen. I'm Chairman and CEO here at Athersys. We are very focused and have been focused for more than 15 years on the cell therapy and regenerative medicine space. I'll talk a little bit about our experience with RMAT today, and I'm pleased to have the opportunity to do that. I've also been actively involved with Michael and others at the Alliance for Regenerative Medicine since the early days of that organization, and I'm thrilled with the progress that's been achieved by the efforts of ARM and the other people that have been involved to see things like RMAT come to fruition, and excited to talk about our experience.
Great. Thanks, Gil, and thanks, everyone. So now that we've had those introductions and also received that great primer from Patty on RMAT, let's now get a little more background on how RMAT was initially developed. So we know RMAT was established through the passage of the 21st Century Cures Act at the end of 2016, and the Alliance for Regenerative Medicine played a significant role in this process. So now I'd like to ask Michael, can you talk about ARM's role in shaping the development of RMAT and other provisions related to regenerative medicine that were laid out in the 21st Century Cures Act? And can you also give us a sense for the significance to the regenerative medicine market and the importance of such a pathway for regenerative medicines?
Sure. Thank you. I'm happy to do that. So I think just to take a half a step back, what became clear to the leaders of the Alliance for Regenerative Medicine and those of us who've been working in this field for some time was that there was, of course, tremendous promise in the technology in terms of its ability to demonstrate clinical benefit. To some extent, there had been some products that had been on the market that had already, early kind of regenerative medicine products that had shown that it wasn't just sort of a scientist in a lab with a petri dish, that there was actually some real clinical benefit to patients. Clinical trials were starting up and advancing and moving into mid-stage or later stage. And what was clear, however, was that there did not seem to be a discrete pathway to market from a regulatory perspective. And that was in contrast to other countries that had specifically done that. So Japan being the obvious example, but also the UK had done that, Canada, South Korea, other countries, frankly, economic competitors to the United States, had taken very affirmative steps to try to work with the product developers and researchers in regenerative medicine to try to figure out a way to support those efforts and get products to market more efficiently. And so the Alliance for Regenerative Medicine, from its earliest days, took on the task of trying to educate policymakers, regulators, and legislators in the United States that really for this industry to really take off and provide the benefits to patients, many of whom were suffering from diseases that currently had no treatment, that there needed to be this kind of focused government effort and focused government support. And we were very clear that in doing so, we wanted to make sure that no effort would ever do anything to either in fact or suggest that the FDA should reduce its or lower its standards for safety and efficacy for many products. So we were not suggesting that companies or developers in this space should get some kind of, be allowed to take a shortcut, or should be allowed some kind of waiver of existing rules. Quite to the contrary, we just wanted to make the process more efficient. We did not want to make it any less stringent because, frankly, number one, patient safety was at stake here. And of course, number two was we wanted to make sure that when products achieved approval from the FDA, that people knew that they had undergone a rigorous development and evaluation process. So we've been having, you see, a very rough timeline. We start there in 2015, but really the conversations had started prior to that. And we kind of laid out all of these principles, and we said, you know, you need to create this structure. We want to use existing programs at FDA. We don't want to reduce any standards, but you know, there are some things that should be modified or accommodated in existing FDA guidance and regulation to accommodate the fact that we're talking about very new technologies, and we're talking about technologies that may be treating unmet medical needs, or often are treating unmet medical needs, and may have very small patient populations. And so it's great that companies can go and talk to the FDA about all of these issues, but we want to make it clear that there are different options, and we want to make it clear that there's a way forward for the industry, and we want to do it in collaboration with the agency. So we don't want to, this gets back to what I was saying before, we don't want to beat up the agency. We want to say we share the same goal. We want to make sure that safe and effective products get to patients as soon as possible. So now let's figure out how to, you know, put all those pieces together. And all those pieces put together is what you see in the RMAT designation. And so it required us to work with FDA, certainly required us to work with the Congress. It became clear that they were very interested in these technologies and in trying to develop a framework to foster them. So we worked on a bipartisan basis with members of Congress as well as with the FDA, and it all came to fruition in the 21st Century Cures Act with the enactment of the RMAT designation. And you can see also on this time frame that FDA started implementing the program almost immediately. So the head of CBER, Peter Marks, has said the day that the bill passed, there was an RMAT application on his desk, and the agency immediately, within a few months, was developing guidance, was advising folks how to apply for the designation and the like, I think, which really demonstrates how supportive the agency is of this designation and its use, and frankly, kind of validates our efforts all along to make sure that we were working in collaboration with the agency to try to make this happen. So the agency has moved forward. They've proposed their draft guidance, which lays out a great roadmap for companies. They've said that gene therapies should qualify, as you just heard. They are now doing disease-specific guidances for gene therapies, and of course, there are 20 RMAT designations to date. I'll do the next slide, please. Go. So just very, very quickly, you know, for those of you who don't know, the first bullet obviously mentions that we created this designation. The second bullet really outlines what I was just talking about, which is to say that for the first time, there's now this specific product designation for regenerative medicine advanced therapies. It's really important for everyone to understand the magnitude of that, because while there are other expedited approval programs in the law right now, they are not technology specific. The RMAT is technology specific, and that's why it's such a significant advance, because it optimizes FDA pathways for these products similar to breakthrough designation. And in fact, as you know, it essentially allows you to, provides a portal for a regenerative medicine company to access those programs. And then it provides certain benefits, which you see listed here, which is guaranteed interactions with the agency, you're eligible for priority review, accelerated approval, there is flexibility in the number of clinical sites you can use, possibility of using real-world evidence. It's really important to understand a couple of things about those pieces. One is that these were ideas, again, that we worked out with the FDA in advance. Two, they are specifically addressing needs that companies raised. They wanted to have more interactions with the agency. They wanted to be able to use real-world evidence. But we made clear in the law that the FDA, companies, again, don't get a shortcut. FDA has the opportunity to is part of this process. So it really means that you as a sponsor have the opportunity to talk about all of those things with the agency. And that is, again, incredibly significant. Next slide. So I'll just close here by saying it really accomplishes all the goals that we had laid out at the beginning of our thought process. It protects patients by maintaining the high standards of safety and efficacy. It helps product developers with regulatory clarity and ways that you can access expedited approval. And it sort of brings us up to par or arguably ahead of our economic competitors. And I think the fact that there's so much demand for the designation and FDA's interest in promoting the designation, I think speaks volumes in ways that I could never do about the value of the designation. So I'll stop there. We'll go to the next slide for other speakers.
Thanks, Michael. That was really interesting to hear about how RMAT was initially conceptualized and became a reality, and ARM's pivotal role in doing that, and how this designation has really been helping to foster the development of regenerative medicine. So thanks very much for that. So following on that overview of the important steps and how RMAT was shaped, what I'd like to do next is go through a background, just a quick overview of the expedited regulatory programs that are available to sponsors in the U.S. and compare and contrast them with RMAT before we get into this discussion with our panelists on their experiences. So aside from RMAT, there are 4 expedited pathways that exist, including 3 regulatory designations and 1 approval pathway. And the first 2 that are shown here of those 4 are Fast Track and Breakthrough Therapy. Products that are fast-tracked are developed for serious conditions with the designation granted based on either non-clinical or clinical evidence. And it's important to note that breakthrough therapy designated products need to meet a higher level of evidence, in that they have to demonstrate substantial improvement over an existing therapy based on preliminary clinical evidence. And in terms of benefits, you can see that breakthrough therapy designated products enjoy benefits in building off of those with fast track designation. So in addition to having actions to facilitate the development and expedited review of therapies, as well as eligibility for priority review, breakthrough therapy designated products also are able to have sponsors are able to have intensive FDA guidance on efficient drug development, as well as an organizational commitment to involve senior management in facilitating the development program. The other 2 expedited programs that are available in the U.S. are accelerated approval and priority review. Accelerated approval is the approval pathway, and this applies to settings where the disease course is quite long, where an extended period of time would be required to measure the intended clinical benefit, and it's only available for products that provide a meaningful therapeutic benefit over existing treatments. With accelerated approval, this allows for clearance of drugs based on a surrogate or intermediate endpoint that is likely to predict clinical benefit, or on a clinical endpoint that could be measured earlier than irreversible morbidity or mortality. And for priority review, this is granted to products that treat serious conditions and also represent an improvement in terms of safety and effectiveness. And with priority review, it ensures that the agency will act on an application within 6 months. Now, priority review can be granted to any of the other expedited pathways, including, as of the draft guidance that was issued in November 2017, RMAT designated therapies. So how does RMAT compare? Well, we've already heard from Patty and Michael on how RMAT is defined, which is essentially a special status pathway that's available for regenerative medicines. In terms of the benefits, RMAT designated therapies enjoy similar benefits to that of breakthrough therapy designations, plus some other features, including early interactions with the FDA that can really be focused around potential surrogate or intermediate endpoints, as well as other ways besides those discussions to potentially support accelerated approval and satisfy those post-approval requirements. And as I mentioned, according to the draft guidance that came out in November 2017, RMAT designated therapies are also eligible for all of the other expedited pathways. So building off of this comparison of RMAT to breakthrough therapy designation, if we now take a closer look specifically at these two pathways, there are many similarities and some differences. So notably, with these two designations, there is the requirement of the use of preliminary clinical evidence to support the designation. And similarly, both of them cannot use non-clinical evidence to support the filing. In addition, with both designations comes with the benefit of having frequent interactions with the FDA to advise on several clinical development issues. And both breakthrough therapy designated products as well as RMAT designated products are eligible for priority review as well as accelerated approval. One of the key differences, which Michael has pointed out, is that to qualify for RMAT, the therapy must be a regenerative medicine. So this is a technology-specific designation. On the other hand, regenerative medicines as well as other therapeutic modalities can qualify for breakthrough therapy. In addition, another major difference is with breakthrough therapy designated products, those must show substantial improvement on a clinically significant endpoint over an available therapy, whereas RMAT does not contain that in its definition. Some other differences include the fact that with RMAT, there can be those early interactions with the FDA to discuss potential and determine potential surrogate or intermediate endpoints that would support accelerated approval. And the FDA seems to be a really big proponent of using the accelerated approval pathway for regenerative medicines. FDA Commissioner Scott Gottlieb has come out and said that this is a great way to get regenerative medicines to the market faster and more efficiently, and would allow the FDA to monitor regenerative medicines more closely for durability of response as well as off-target effects. Another thing that the FDA has pointed out as a feature of RMAT is that a lot of those interactions with the FDA and sponsors can focus around manufacturing issues, and manufacturing in cell and gene therapy is a really important consideration. Again, Commissioner Gottlieb has highlighted this several times, noting that approximately 80% of the review time, particularly for cell and gene therapies, is spent on manufacturing and quality issues. So I'd like to get the thoughts of the panelists on this specific comparison of breakthrough therapy and RMAT, but first, as we move into the discussion on their experiences with RMAT, I just wanted to start with some context setting, and we have several discussion topics to cover. And I'd like to first ask each of the panelists to give us some context on their RMAT designated programs and how these programs had been progressing up to the point of seeking RMAT designation. So first, turning to Tim, you're in the unique situation of holding two RMAT designations, one for EB101 and the other for ABO102. So can you give us some background on these candidates, the target indications, the current clinical status, and can you also give us some insights into your experiences with building up to those RMAT designations and the progression?
Sure. So, to kind of set the stage a bit, the two designations that we received were for the EB101 product, which is for recessive dystrophic epidermolysis bullosa. That is an ex vivo gene-corrected, essentially skin graft that is used in patients with butterfly skin disease. And ABO102, which is an AAV gene therapy for the treatment of patients with MPS IIIA. So, right off the bat, there's a very different modality. The previous RMAT designations have been granted to either what would be considered pure play cell therapies or to cell therapies that are essentially an ex vivo corrected gene therapy. So the ABO102 program for MPS IIIA, I believe, is the first what we again consider a pure play gene therapy to receive that. And we looked around at what had been granted previously, and again, sitting in on multiple meetings with the agency at these conferences talking about breakthrough and RMAT designations. What's interesting to note is that the EB101 program had breakthrough status, and we decided to go for the RMAT designation as well, both as a value addition to the program, but also to really get a better understanding of how we might be able to approach that for some of our other programs. And the agency was, very collaborative in their approach and granted RMAT to the EB101 program. When we were looking at the MPS IIIA program, what we really wanted to evaluate was how much data was really needed and whether we would go for RMAT or whether we would go for breakthrough designation. And again, as this was evolving and last November this opened up to pure play gene therapies, we thought, well, we had, I think at that point, 9 or 10 patients that had been treated, and they had gone through, over a year worth of clinical data, and the clinical data was very, very promising. And so we elected at that point to go for the RMAT. And again, the agency, again, was very collaborative and granted this designation and, has been treating it very similar to a breakthrough designation. And I'm sure we'll get into that a bit more in the discussion.
Thanks, Tim. I just wanted to follow up with you. You had mentioned in the draft guidance the addition of genetically modified cells or gene therapy as a class in terms of defining regenerative medicines. Do you have any thoughts on why those weren't initially included in the outline of the designation? I know Peter Marks from CBER had made a remark early on in RMAT implementation saying that there would need to be more thought given to include gene therapy, and gave the example of needing more information on live viral vectors and their elimination. So I'm just wondering if you had any thoughts on why that pure play gene therapy, as you described, wasn't initially included.
Well, I'll give a brief answer, which is really that, it was discussed, but really I think I'd turn that question over to Michael. Michael can probably, as one of the architects really being involved with the legislative policy, he probably could answer that with a more definitive answer.
Sure, yeah. I think that at the time, Congress wasn't quite as familiar with gene therapy, even as they are today, and so I think there were a lot of questions about it, and folks weren't sure, and there was the whole issues around all those issues around manipulating embryos and all of that, and so I think there was a lot of questions, and so whereas in contrast, folks really had a sense of what a cell therapy was and what an ex vivo gene therapy was, which a lot of folks in Congress thought of as cell therapy, if you will. And so I think it was kind of the combination of all of those things that that led to that gene therapy not being explicitly included in the statute. They also, you'll note, did not explicitly exclude it. And I think when FDA looked at the field and looked at the statutory language and looked at the technology, that's why they added it and made sure it was included.
Right. Okay. Yep. Thanks. No, that's really helpful to understand that background. So, yeah, thanks for that, Michael and Tim. Okay, moving over to Kevin. You're from Roivant Sciences, representing Enzivant Therapeutics. So I'm wondering if you can give us some background on your RVT 802 program, and again, how that program had been progressing up until the point where you decided to pursue RMAT designation.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Our situation may be a little bit different in that this is a cultured thymus tissue product, the RVT 802 product, that was pioneered at Duke University. So it was developed by Dr. Luis Markert at Duke in the 1990s and is used as a transplant, a tissue replacement for patients with complete DeGeorge anomaly. And these are patients that are born that completely lack a thymus and therefore do not develop a functional immune system. And Dr. Markert developed what we now call the RVT 802 product and had already published a significant amount of information showing a survival benefit following treatment. And Enzivant acquired this technology and entered into a licensing agreement with Duke University to work towards BLA filing and commercialization. And that occurred in late 2016, which was right around the same time as the passage of the 21st Century Cures Act. So I got involved with the program in around December of 2016, and as I said, right after the passage of the 21st Century Cures Act and the development of the RMAT pathway. So right out of the gate, we were thinking that we had the potential with this product to be eligible not only for breakthrough designation, but also the RMAT pathway. And we did have some discussions about the appropriateness of the pathways and both designations, and we can get into that a little bit more. But we, decided to proceed early on with a filing for the designation and have been very happy with that. As mentioned earlier, the designations were both granted in April of 2017, and we've had a lot of great interactions with the agency as we've been moving towards a BLA filing planned for later this year.
Great. Thanks, Kevin. Thanks for that background on your RVT 802 program. Next, Gil, can you give us some background on multi-stem and talk about what the target indications are, where it is in the pipeline, and how that program had progressed up into the point of deciding to go for RMAT designation?
Sure. Thanks, Amanda. So our program, Multi-Stem, is an allogeneic off-the-shelf cell therapy that's being developed primarily for indications in the critical care spectrum. So this includes specific indications in the neurological, cardiovascular, inflammatory, and immune disease areas, as well as some other areas where we've done work that I won't touch on today. But our most advanced program is actually a phase 3 program in treating ischemic stroke. Our philosophy and our strategy is really to focus specifically on indications where we feel that current standard of care is either limited, inadequate, or unavailable for many patients, and where we believe, based on evidence, our technology can fundamentally improve the standard of care for these patients. Our stroke program has been in development for a number of years. We had completed a phase 2 double-blind randomized international clinical trial that led to our decision to move forward and apply for RMAT designation. In our stroke program, we believe, based on the results of our prior clinical work, that we can extend the treatment window out to 36 hours, which is a significant extension over current standard of care for interventions like TPA or other interventions that really have to be conducted in the first several hours after the stroke or optimally within the first several hours after the stroke. Our situation with respect to leading up to the RMAT designation is a little bit different. It's a little bit atypical because we actually obtained a special protocol assessment first, which paved the path for our registrational study, which we're now in the process of getting started. We then, subsequent to that, received Fast Track designation. Then we received RMAT designation. So, if you will, we kind of did it in the reverse order of the way that I think ordinarily people should think about it. But some of this had to do with the timing, where we were in the program. It had to do with the timing of the implementation of the RMAT designation program and some of our other priorities and other things going on. It's also fair to note that Michael had described earlier the fact that regulatory designations in other jurisdictions like Japan or other countries have also been implemented in recent years. And we've obtained some of those designations as well. So, for example, in Japan for our stroke program, we obtained Sakigake designation with our partner in Japan, Helios, which is analogous to Fast Track. So I think, just to underscore a couple of points that have been made already, our interactions with the FDA have been nothing but positive. I think there are some specific things that I would recommend to others that are considering pursuing the RMAT designation or doing some of the things that we're going to be talking about in the call today. But certainly we're thrilled with the way that the FDA has defined and implemented the program. Clearly this is having a big impact on the field, and we're excited to be part of that.
Okay, great. Thanks, Gil. I do want to ask you about that experience with your partner, Helios, in Japan, but I'm going to move on to get to some of these other topics. If we have time, I'll circle back. So moving on to the next discussion point, wanted to talk about those qualifications or the criteria for meeting RMAT, and wondering if each of you can talk about this process. Was it a difficult process to work through? What were the barriers or challenges to making this determination? And also, is there any opportunity for a sponsor to get preliminary advice from the FDA on your RMAT request? So I'll first start with Tim. If you can talk about, looking at the qualifications or criteria for RMAT, how this process was and barriers and challenges.
Yeah, so, the process was really, I think, pretty straightforward. Companies have to, or programs have to evaluate, the amount of clinical data that they have to go in and try to apply for this designation. I think one of the differences between RMAT and Breakthrough, as was highlighted on one of the earlier slides, was really the amount and the duration of clinical data. When we were assessing, when we'd want to go for it, it wasn't going to be probably after just 2 or 3 patients. We certainly wanted to put our best foot forward and apply with, a significant amount of supportive clinical efficacy data to encourage the agency to be supportive. I think that I know of a few other programs that have had, 2 or 3 patients treated, and with only a short runway on efficacy, and were actually denied. So they fall into the designations that were not allowed category. And so when you're thinking about your programs and really the clinical development timeline, it's really critical to assess how many what's your path towards an eventual BLA or an accelerated approval pathway, and just how the RMAT really would figure into that. You can try in any one of the available options, whether a Type B or a Type C meeting, to have a discussion with the agency about timing. Those are probably going to be more informal conversations than formal.
Great. Thanks, Tim. Kevin, turning to you, getting your experience on looking at the qualifications or criteria for RMAT and working through that process. So according to my count, RVT 802 was the second RMAT to be designated after the pathway was created after a product called Umicil. So this is pretty early on. Were there any difficulties or bumps in the road? Just wondering about, what that process was to make those determinations and understanding if your program met the criteria for RMAT.
Yeah, very good. Thank you. And again, I'll say that Enzivant has had a general focus on fatal pediatric conditions, and complete DeGeorge anomaly certainly falls into that, with almost all infants with complete DeGeorge anomaly being succumbing to that by the age of 2 years. And as I mentioned in my introductory comments, this was technology pioneered at Duke University in the 1990s. So we had over 20 years of clinical data demonstrating a survival benefit, that had been published. So, it is a rare disease, not, a tremendous number of patients, but, over 50 patients had been transplanted and published, and we had that survival benefit that was robust. So for us, it was a relatively easy decision as far as the amount of data that we had to proceed and the eligibility. Just as far as the technicalities and the approach, it was early on, but we largely relied on the existing guidance for breakthrough therapy designation and just customized it somewhat for the RMAT designation. So I would agree, while there is always that avenue to reach out to the agency to discuss your application, we did not seek any formal advice and rather just proceeded ahead.
So it is possible to interact with the FDA and get at least some preliminary advice from them on your RMAT request. Is that something that's available to sponsors?
Yeah, and I welcome the feedback from my colleagues on the panel. I know that's formally noted with the breakthrough guidance. Whether or not it's a formal option, I think that it exists certainly through, as you mentioned, you could request a Type C meeting, but I think there's also the opportunity in general for interactions with your project manager at the agency. But I welcome input from the others.
Maybe we can go next to Gil. You can comment on that, and also just in general, evaluating your results for multi-STEM and making those determinations on whether or not you met the criteria for RMAT.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to follow up on the point about getting preliminary information from the FDA on whether or how to proceed with respect to an RMAT designation. Like everyone else, we had questions initially about the extent of the information that we thought should be provided to the FDA, and sometimes it just helps to pick up the phone and talk to your project manager or talk to somebody else that they may refer you to get that information. I think that's very helpful, and it's one of the benefits of building a thoughtful, respectful, engaging relationship with the FDA and the people that work there. Rather than having to go through a formal meeting request for certain types of issues where you might be able to get sufficient information in the context of a single phone call, I think that's where that type of engagement can really be helpful and efficient. So I think that in terms of our assessment for whether or not we met the requirements for applying for RMAT designation, it really fundamentally focused around two questions. One was, does stroke qualify as a serious unmet medical need? I think it was pretty evident that, in fact, it does, given that the vast majority of patients that have strokes don't receive effective treatment. And then the second question was, does our clinical data provide a basis for the preliminary clinical evidence of safety and efficacy standard? And we certainly felt that it did. And in a way, we had the benefit of prior discussions with the FDA around the special protocol assessment and the fast track designation. But we moved forward on that basis, confident that we in fact did meet the criteria, submitted our application accordingly, and then received the designation subsequent to that. So I think you need to take a hard look at what you have. You need to assess whether or not you objectively meet the criteria, and then if you're confident that you do have that basis, then certainly should move forward.
Great. Thanks very much for your thoughts on that. Moving on to the next point, discussion point. So going back to the compare and the contrast of RMAT with breakthrough therapy designation, there are many similarities and benefits. There seems to be a higher bar with breakthrough therapy in the requirement to demonstrate substantial improvement over an available therapy. compared with RMAT, but virtually the same benefits. And I think there is some clarification that's going to be needed for these two designations. For instance, following the draft guidance that came out in November 2017, Bio commented on it and asked for further guidance to sponsors on which designation is more appropriate for different types of programs. So I'm wondering if I can particularly get Tim and Kevin's insights on this, because both Abiona's EB101 and Enzavant's RVT802 have both breakthrough therapy designation and RMAT designation. So I'm wondering if you can talk about the strategy behind this and why not just secure RMAT designation only. And I know, Tim, you've already mentioned that you decided to go for RMAT because this is really a value addition. So can you maybe talk a little bit more about your thinking with that?
Sure. For our EB101 program, the program had a couple of years worth of data, and we had been advised by the FDA to go ahead and essentially stop the phase 1/2 and move on to a phase 3. So, based on those conversations, it seems that, and at that point too, we were discussing some of the potential designations, and it seemed that in those discussions, breakthrough had a high likelihood of being granted. And the RMAT as a cell and gene therapy company offers additional, we think, hands-on approach, with CBER. So when we looked at that, and then also started to think about, again, the 3A program for MPS 3A, as we were kind of looking at the differences between the breakthrough and the RMAT, the general sense was that, as you commented on, the RMAT was a slightly lower bar, and you could do it with clinical, but you need clinical data. So I think one of the audience members had asked, when do you apply for RMAT? You have to have an IND, you have to have some level of clinical data to be able to go for it. If you're looking at things in the pre-IND or getting into the IND, you'd be thinking more about fast track. But for us, it was since the RMAT offers, at that point, potentially all of the same things as the breakthrough designation, we wanted to try and kind of put that to the test and see what ended up, with the agency. And so far, we can, confirm that the agency has been thinking of this very much like breakthrough. So it'll be, in the gene and cell therapy space, very interesting to see how these designations proceed as more companies get them and more products move towards a filing.
Yeah, thanks. It's definitely a fuzzy area in terms of the overlap between those two designations. Kevin, did you want to comment on RVT802 with both breakthrough therapy and RMAT?
Yeah, I can quickly comment. I think we were the first company, at least to publicly disclose that we would receive both RMAT and breakthrough therapy designation. And there was some internal discussion as far as should we apply for one or the other or both. And ultimately did conclude, obviously, to apply for both. The RMAT designation, I said, was very new, but it did seem particularly relevant to our tissue therapy. And we talked about the focus on gene therapies, tissue therapies, regenerative medicines, and given that and the fact that our product had been manufactured at an academic facility, a GMP facility at Duke University, we knew we were going to have a lot of discussions in that arena, so that was certainly another reason to pursue the RMAT designation. But of course, the breakthrough designation was well established and well known. And the other thing I would point out is there really just wasn't significantly more work to apply for both designations. So while we were able to proceed with that, and I would say that we've been very happy with both designations. I would agree that it's hard to disaggregate the benefits. We've had great communication with the FDA, but it's very hard to say if that was due to breakthrough or RMAT. When you have both, you can't really disentangle them. But been very happy with having both designations. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thanks for those thoughts. It's really interesting to hear. Gil, I don't know if you have anything to add to that, the distinction between RMAT and breakthrough therapy?
Yeah, just real quickly. I mean, I think it's already been shown that sponsors can obtain both designations, as Kevin has mentioned. But my personal view is that in most instances for sponsors that are developing regenerative medicine or advanced therapies, is that it's probably a bit unnecessary. That in certain instances there may be an element of an advantage to that, but I strongly encourage those that are involved in the regenerative medicine and advanced therapy phase to focus on RMAT. I think it's a regulatory designation that's been specifically created for these types of therapies, and I think it provides substantial benefits in terms of the interactions with the FDA and the other elements that have already been described.
Yeah, this is Michael. I will just say that FDA officials have been pretty clear that first of all, that they don't want the people in the industry to think, well, because breakthrough is someone was just saying about breakthrough was more established, which it certainly was, and at the time, clearly I would never question anyone's the success of the program Panelist here, but going forward, I think FDA has sort of said, look, you don't have to feel that the RMAT is sort of the kind of a second-class citizen in the bank of expedited approval programs, and that somehow breakthrough is more prioritized at the agency or more important at the agency or any of those things. That they see the two as equal, if you will, in that way. So to Gil's point, I mean, there certainly might be times when it's appropriate to go for both or to go for breakthrough or whatever, but folks should not think that, kind of from now on think that, we'll get better treatment at the agency if we get a breakthrough than we would if we got an RMAT. That's not the way the agency is handling it.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Michael, for that input. So I see we only have a few minutes of time left. I think we've addressed all of these bullets in one way or another, but I guess to finish up, if I could get maybe some closing thoughts from all of you on any recommendations or I guess key takeaways from your perspective, recommendations you may have for other developers who are looking to secure RMAT designation in terms of lessons learned or even things to avoid. I'll start with Tim first.
Sure, thanks, Amanda. So, as you think about trying to apply for these designations, you really want to try to put yourself in their shoes. Do you believe the clinical data? Is it really a superior product? Is it going to be transformative for patient lives if this were to be approved? And to think forward on your approach, because that's how they're really looking at this. And you want to be able to provide a clinical data set that's compelling. So, you're adding in all of your patient profiles, you're adding in all of your clinical data to date, both safety and efficacy, even though this is primarily focused on efficacy. As I think the space moves forward, particularly in the gene therapy space, I think you'll see a number of additional RMAT designations granted because there's been such positive momentum. There'll be a lot of learning points coming up probably in just the next 6 months.
Great, thanks, Tim. Kevin, any closing remarks on that, on your lessons learned or key recommendations?
Yeah, I would just add, again, we've had, great interactions with the FDA since the granting of the RMAT designation and encourage sponsors to take advantage of that. Ultimately, you're responsible for driving your development program forward in the most efficient way possible. So, always keep that in mind as far as the opportunity to meet with the FDA. That's excellent, but it also involves a significant commitment of resources on your end and on the agency's end. So you're going to continue to act as sponsors should in that responsible manner and be respectful of the agency's time and your own company time that it takes to get involved and engaged with the FDA.
Great. Thanks for that, Kevin. And last but not least, Gil, any closing thoughts, recommendations, or key lessons learned?
Yeah, just a couple of points. One's kind of a global point, and another is a little bit more specific and operational about the RMAT process itself. I think From a global perspective, it's important for everyone to recognize and remember that the FDA has a very important and frankly a sacred responsibility to provide oversight that's designed to help protect and ensure the well-being of patients. And the FDA consists of people just like the rest of us that are deeply committed to seeing safer and more effective medicines developed. They want to see us succeed in the development of these innovative medicines. And there are a number of different reasons for this, but one obvious one is that just like the rest of us, the FDA have sick family members or loved ones, and they want to see the boundaries of medicine advance. The RMAT designation has been designed and implemented to help us and to promote that innovation. For those people that like to characterize the FDA as a hurdle or an obstacle that needs to be overcome, I would strongly disagree with that, and I'm pretty sure that most others on this call would as well. My recommendation is approach the FDA with genuine respect and humility. The FDA can be very, very helpful, but I think the angle that you come to them with is critical in terms of establishing the right type of dynamic. Occasionally the FDA may say, hey, we recommend you consider the following, or that you do the following, and people need to recognize that quite often the FDA has relevant information, experience, or knowledge from other programs that it can't share directly. So it's important to listen to them carefully when they're trying to give you guidance, even if they can't explain all the reasons why. The more specific operational point that I would offer up is if you make the decision to move forward and submit your RMAT application, is be thorough but be concise. Really try and keep your presentation, your story, to 20 pages or less if possible, and really hit the key elements that you think are going to help make the case and be relevant to the FDA. You don't need to overwhelm them, right? Be very focused and efficient in terms of your presentation of that, and I think that will probably be beneficial in terms of the assessment and the outcome.
Great, thank you, Gil, and thanks everyone for those closing remarks. I'd like to give special thanks to Patty, Michael, Tim, Kevin, and Gil for a great discussion on RMAT. On behalf of Informa Pharma Intelligence and the Alliance for Regenerative Medicine, thank you to the audience for listening in today. If you have any follow-up questions, you can submit them to the email address posted here, which is pharma@informa.com, and we will respond as soon as possible. As a reminder, this webinar was recorded, and that recording will be sent out to all who registered. Thank you again, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.